The sky was bleeding light, not red, not violent, but a soft, radiant gold that shimmered like tears in zero gravity. 3 moons hung above like ancient witnesses, carved with orbit scars and secrets, casting silvery halos across the biosphere dome. Beneath them, the world breathed. John Roan Morton stepped off the drop shuttle, boots kissing the surface of Alaris for the first time. And the planet kissed back, literally. The landing platform pulsed under his feet, a gentle rhythm like a heartbeat, like it was alive. "Right," he muttered, "let's pretend that's normal." The air was warm, thick with some kind of luminescent pollen, or maybe stardust. Every breath carried a taste, metallic, floral, electric. His HUD blinked warnings, then softened. Atmosphere, stable. Emotional field, elevated. "Recommend caution," he chuckled dryly. "Caution?" I brought a wrench and sarcasm. "That's all Earth sent." The others didn't laugh. Tall, elegant Alarian guards stood like statues, draped in flowing bioweave robes that shimmered with ultraviolet colors. Their eyes didn't blink. Their skin seemed grown, not born. Behind them, the Grand Temple rose like a memory fossilized in chrome and time. And in front of it, the funeral began. John had seen military processions, planetary evacuations, even a riot on Mars with 2 flaming vending machines. But this was something else. Mourners moved in spirals, not lines. Their gestures weren't just ritual, they were energy, literal light drawn from the air and bent into color and sound. A choreography of grief, no music, no chanting, just emotion translated into motion, into light. The sarcophagus hovered at the temple's base, transparent, crystalline, humming. Inside, the Queen of Alaris, eternal and serene, clothed in woven starlight, and standing beside her the daughter, Siriel Vela. John's breath caught, not from awe, though there was that, but from pressure. Her presence weighed on the world. She wore a living armor, dark and sleek, glowing softly along curves that made his earth-trained brain short-circuit. Her hair was silver, cascading like liquid comet trails. Her eyes, green, ancient, impossible, met his, and for a heartbeat she faltered, just slightly. Just enough to know she saw him, not as a diplomat or a representative or a nuisance, but as John. He gave her a nod. She looked away. Well, off to a great start. The ceremony shifted. A ring of mourners formed around a strange monument near the temple, a tree. But not of wood. It was grown from metal, its roots embedded in the stone, its branches reaching toward the stars. It gleamed like chrome, but with an inner warmth, like sunlight caught in steel. It began to pulse. John felt it before he saw it. A thump in his chest, his own heartbeat, echoed. The tree opened. No cracking, no groaning, just a soft parting of seamless metal like an eyelid opening. Inside, a void. And from that void, something emerged, a suit. It floated, sleek, black chrome laced with violet veins of light. Not hovering by antigrav, it moved like it was swimming through the air, fluid, intentional, curious. Symbols glowed faintly across its surface, runes that shifted as he stared. Some looked mathematical, some felt personal, like they knew him. "Why is it looking at me like that?" John muttered. No one answered. Every Alarian had frozen. Siriel stepped forward, slow, controlled. Her voice, when it came, rang clear without amplification. "The armor of origin has not awakened in 5 centuries." She paused, looked straight at him. "It awakens only when the echo is heard." John blinked. I didn't say anything." The suit rotated toward him, his HUD flared red, heart rate spiking, emotional field peaking. "Nope," he said, taking a cautious step back. "I am not the chosen one. Wrong address. Try the guy with the forehead tattoo." The suit moved closer. It stopped a meter away. The runes glowed brighter, the pulses aligned with his chest, with his heartbeat. A low hum started, not from the suit but from the tree behind it. The whole temple complex began to resonate. John stood frozen, his boots half glued by instinct and awe. His body screamed to move, his brain screamed to analyze. And somewhere deep in his chest, something answered. One step. That's all it would take. The armor hovered, open, waiting. And John, human engineer, cynic, grease-stained problem solver, breathed slowly and said the only thing that felt honest. "This is a terrible idea." And then he stepped forward. The silence after John stepped forward was so thick it had texture. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The armor, ancient, black chrome, humming with violet light, hovered still, inches from him. Its inner plates shifted subtly, as if sniffing him. "Do I shake its hand, or does it absorb me?" he whispered, mostly to himself. Behind him nobody moved. Then came a sound, a single step, light, controlled. Siriel. Her voice was calm, but beneath it, amusement, worry, wonder. You've startled it. The suit is startled? John turned, raising an eyebrow. You people sure you didn't genetically engineer your fashion with trust issues? She didn't smile, but her eyes sparkled. It is not fashion. It is memory. That shut him up. The armor slowly receded, drifting back into the roots of the metal tree like it had only come to taste the air. The runes on its surface pulsed once, then dimmed, but not fully. They still watched. Siriel gave a subtle motion to the escorts. The ritual was ending. The crowd began to part, whispers blooming like pollen in the air. But she didn't leave. Instead, she turned to him. There was a pause, then, "Come. I want to show you something before your diplomatic handlers quarantine you." John blinked. That's oddly specific and extremely plausible. She was already walking. He followed. The temple's inner corridor didn't feel built. It felt grown. Like architecture had merged with biology and art. The walls curved like living bone, inlaid with strands of crystal that pulsed in gentle rhythm, as if echoing a planetary heartbeat. He reached out, brushing the surface. Warm, smooth, breathing. "I'm going to need therapy after touching this," he muttered. Siriel heard. "You speak to yourself often?" "Yeah, engineers do that. It's either that or scream." She glanced at him sidelong, almost smiling. They reached a chamber carved into the core of the temple. The air shifted, cooler, denser, almost sacred. The walls were lined with stasis pods like upright coffins, but elegant. Inside, relics, weapons, armor, some shattered, some asleep. At the center stood it, the same armor, or perhaps its twin, suspended by energy tendrils, motionless. Up close, it shimmered differently. Its black surface wasn't solid. It rippled, barely perceptible, like oil floating on water. John took a step closer. Siriel didn't stop him. "This one has no mind of its own," she said softly. "It is empty, waiting. The one outside was the original, this a preserved echo. So this one won't try to eat me alive?" "Not unless you deserve it," John snorted. She stepped beside him, closer than before. The light caught her skin, making her silver hair almost translucent. He smelled something strange, stars and salt and something warm. Then she said, almost casually, "Put it on." John blinked. "Sorry, what?" "Put it on." He stared at the armor. "Are you joking?" "A little, but I want to see what happens." "Well, that's comforting." Still, he couldn't help it. Something about the way it hovered, expectant and still, made his fingers itch. Like it was calling not to his brain, but to his blood. He raised a hand. The tendrils of light that held the armor receded. Its surface opened. No mechanical clunk, no hiss. Just a smooth, silent unfolding like a flower made of black light. "Well," he said, stepping in. "Worst case, I explode. Best case, I look incredibly cool." Siriel actually smiled. "Do try not to scream." The armor closed, and everything changed. For a second, nothing. Then a snap, like the inside of his skull blinked. A flash. Runes igniting inside the suit, deep crimson bleeding into violet, slithering along the seams like living circuitry. The interior pressed against his skin like warm liquid, then hardened, then pulsed. His chest locked. His vision swam. A voice, not his own, not hers. Genetic pattern accepted, lineage uncertain, echo detected. His knees buckled. Siriel rushed forward, but the armor flared, light whipping out like wings. The whole chamber lit up, breathing, walls pulsing with his heartbeat, the runes on the other relics flickering to life. Warning, initiation sequence incomplete. Emotional stabilizer compromised. "John," her voice snapped through. "Breathe. The armor mirrors your inner state. Control it." "I am controlling it." Except he wasn't. Energy surged around him, swirling through the air like liquid glass. His feet lifted, just barely off the floor. Then, silence. The light dimmed. The runes cooled. The armor sighed and opened. He stumbled out, gasping. Sweat clung to his neck. The symbols on the walls were fading, but some remained, a line of them etched into the floor beneath him, glowing faint red-violet. "That was," Siriel exhaled, "not supposed to happen." John looked at her, chest heaving. "So, still think this was funny?" She paused. "More than ever." He sat down right there on the temple floor, armor still steaming beside him. "Alien funerals," he muttered. 10 out of 10, would almost die again. She didn't laugh, but she did sit beside him. And in the quiet that followed, the runes beneath them pulsed again, just once, like the beat of a distant heart. The runes were still glowing when John blacked out. Not a dramatic fall, more like the floor gently rose to meet him, the way a closing door pretends to be polite before slamming. His vision blurred. Everything went warm, not dangerous warm, but womb warm, comforting, suspicious. Then came the light. Not from outside, but from within the armor, which had slid back over him of its own volition. It wasn't attacking, it was showing. Flashes, not images, memories. Cities like glowing coral reefs, hanging above oceans of stars. Giants of chrome and silk kneeling before a tree that pulsed in rhythm with 1,000 hearts. A child laughing, no training, leaping in zero grav across rings of fire and shadow. The child wore this armor. John screamed, inside his mind, not aloud. His body convulsed once, his hands twitched. The armor's voice returned deeper now, echoing not through air, but through his bones. Code recognized. Lineage, divergent. Echo signal, stabilizing. Ancestral thread reconnected. Directive initializing. Air of the echo. Thalia, he croaked. It's talking to me. She knelt beside him, her face taut, eyes shimmering with a kind of fear he hadn't seen before. Not fear of him, but of what this meant. John, listen to it. Don't fight the echo. That's easy for you to say. You grew up in space palaces with glowy walls. I'm from Ohio. She placed her hand on the chest of the armor, over where his heart beat like a war drum. And that's when the armor spoke to her. Alarian blood detected. Genetic catalyst identified. Cross-species resonance confirmed. The bearer is not pure, but chosen. Thalia's eyes widened. Impossible. The chamber around them reacted. The walls pulsed and ancient symbols ignited, swirling helixes, double-spiraled patterns etched into crystal and stone, winding through every surface like glowing veins. Not art, DNA, Alarian DNA, human DNA. And then, the same pattern. Merged. John stared at it, blinking hard. Tell me that's decorative, please. Thalia's voice was quiet. It is not. The armor released him. With a hiss like held breath exhaling, it peeled back, folding open along invisible seams. John dropped to his knees. Thalia helped him sit, her fingers surprisingly steady. She looked at the wall, not him. Thousands of years ago, my people reached into the void, searching for resonance, life that could reflect our essence. We seeded worlds, carefully, gently. She looked at him now. Earth was one of them. John blinked. You're saying humanity was planted? Not planted, inspired. He let out a long breath. I knew the weirdness in my family tree couldn't just be Uncle Bart. The humor didn't land. She was still staring at him, studying him like a scientist, studying a fracture in a sacred artifact. You're not the result, you're the echo. More light spilled from the wall. New glyphs appeared. Memories embedded in architecture. A being, an Alarian in armor not unlike John's, stood beside a human child. The being bent down, touching the child's chest. Light passed between them. Echo transfer. John stood, shaky, trying to regain balance. His voice came rough. Okay, so let me get this straight. Your people put something in my ancestors. Some kind of what? Sci-fi genetic USB stick, and now I've booted it up by accident. Not accident. Response. The armor only awakens to a resonance match. It fell to you before you ever arrived. He paced, rubbing his temples. That's not fair. I didn't sign up to be a mystical genetic experiment. I fix reactors. I once unclogged a sewage recycler with a toothbrush. He looked up, eyes fierce now. Why me? Thalia stepped forward. Because you still ask that. The words landed harder than they should have. He didn't understand them fully, but they echoed inside him. The same way the tree had, the same way the suit still watched from the dais, silent and alive. He turned toward the DNA mural, one hand brushing the spirals. In its center, a symbol flared. A double helix split into two, then merged back into one. Below it, a phrase, ancient and burning. He didn't know the language, but somehow, he understood it. We are what remembers. John exhaled slower this time, a burden, yes, but not a curse. Then the wall dimmed. The armor pulsed once, acknowledging, then went still. He turned back to Thalia. So, what happens now? Her face was unreadable, but her voice, soft, direct, cut through everything else. Now, you begin to remember. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, not even ominous. This was silence that pressed on your skull like pressure from the inside, like the air had forgotten how to vibrate. John felt it before he heard it, his armor twitching slightly, like a living thing flinching in a dream. Thalia froze mid-sentence, her head tilting. No. Then the lights died. Not faded, died. Every biolite crystal across the temple walls went dark in one breathless flicker. The helix mural dimmed to cold stone. Even the heartbeat rhythm in the corridors vanished. John swallowed. Okay, I'm guessing this isn't part of the tour? And then the sky screamed. They ran. The temple doors blew open before they reached them, wind rushing in like a lung punctured by fear. Outside the city of Alaris, a glorious sprawl of light towers and arc bridges was folding. No, not collapsing, but bending like reality itself was warping at the edges. Above the horizon, something bled through the atmosphere, a storm, not of weather but of darkness. Liquid void. It moved like ink in water, blotting out the 3 moons with one swipe. From its center, a voice slithered across the sky. Alaris, you dream too long. Thalia's face drained of color. Voidborn. John squinted into the skyline. That's supposed to mean something. Or, then he saw them. The Voidborn weren't ships. They weren't even creatures. They were holes shaped like hate. Writhing knots of black gravity, tearing through buildings like silk, leaking anti-light in streaks that left after images burned in his vision. And people, Alarians, were running, scattering like light from a broken prism. Thalia turned sharply. We have to get to the core nexus. The shields won't hold. John followed, breath ragged, heart pounding against his ribs. Boom. 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 The pulse again. Not just his heart, but the planet's. Something ancient throbbed beneath their feet. Even the stone seemed to shiver. They reached the atrium stairs and the world cracked. A black spear of void energy pierced one of the floating sky towers. It folded inward before exploding in reverse, chunks freezing in midair before being sucked backward into nothing. John skidded to a stop. That's not physics, that's cheating. Thalia's voice was steel. Voidborn warped the edge of reality. They speak to the hunger between atoms. That's poetic, doesn't help. She turned to him. Can you activate the armor again? John looked down at his wrists. No light, no hum, just silence. I think it's mad at me. Before she could respond, a figure stepped from the bleeding rift above the city. Not massive, not grotesque, just wrong. A humanoid shape cloaked in layers of folding dark, as if shadows had learned to mimic royalty. Eyes like eclipses, limbs too still. It floated forward, untouched by gravity, and spoke in a voice that struck somewhere behind the ears. So, the last echo awakens. John felt his blood run cold. It was looking at him, straight at him. Who, me? The Void Lord tilted its head. Then, with something almost like reverence. John Morton of Soul, seed of divergence, inheritor of unfinished flame. John whispered to Thalia, "Why do they always use full names when it's bad news?" Her reply was quiet, "Because they studied you, and they've waited." The Void Lord raised one clawed hand, and the sky bent. Air collapsed around them. A shockwave exploded from its gesture, ripping the plaza apart. Statues of Alarian ancestors shattered, their metallic limbs spinning into the air like discarded bones. John was thrown back, hitting the ground hard, coughing dust. Thalia rose like flame, energy spiraling around her gauntlets as she unleashed a shield dome, pure golden geometry swirling in defiance. Her voice echoed through the roar, "Fall back to the inner sanctum, I'll hold them." John scrambled to his feet. "Wait, I can help. I just need a manual or something." Another void spear shattered the ground behind him. The temple's foundations cracked. Runes exploded in arcs of static. Then the armor responded. One single pulse, a glow across John's palm, a heartbeat. Bim. It wasn't full activation, but it was something. The red-violet sigils flickered faintly, then vanished. John turned to the Void Lord, who stared at him now not as prey, but as something familiar. "We remember what you were, what you will become." A symbol appeared in the void behind it, a black spiral, infinite, wrapping around a red core. The same symbol John had seen once in a dream he thought was a migraine. Thalia saw it too. That's the heart mark, the symbol of the planet's core. John's eyes widened. "You mean the thing this entire city was built to protect?" "They're going for the heart of Alaris," she said. "If it falls, we fall." The Void Lord floated higher. "You were meant to sleep, John Morton, not burn." The void thickened. John stood, still shaking, still unsure, but standing. He stared into the darkness above, into the spiral, and just for a moment something inside him answered back. A whisper. "Burn anyway." The tunnel sloped downward, swallowing light with each step. John could barely keep pace with Thalia. Her movements were sharp, deliberate, each stride cutting through the half-lit mist like memory through silence. Behind them, Alaris still burned. The black spiral above the city pulsed like a second heart in the sky, distant but pressing. "This is crazy," John muttered, panting, boots slipping on glassy stone. Running away from a living singularity to do What? Energy yoga in a cave? Thalia didn't slow. You need to bond with the armor, fully, or next time the Voidborn speak your name, they won't stop at whispers. John glanced at the barely flickering rune on his palm. I can't even bond with my coffee machine. Thalia suddenly stopped. Before them stood a door, not mechanical, not ancient in ruin, but alive. A wall of living crystal, pulsing with shifting colors. Not random, but rhythmic. Each hue beat in time with John's chest. The moment he stepped closer, the crystal flared, casting a reflection not of his face, but of what he was feeling. Doubt, curiosity, a flicker of awe. This is the sanctum, Thalia said softly, built inside a living quartz formation older than Alaris itself. It doesn't show truth, it shows self. The door slid open without a sound, parting like water. Inside, the air shifted, thick with electricity and something warmer. Not heat, not scent. Memory. The chamber was massive, round, and breathing. The walls pulsed in light that responded to their breath. Veins of violet and blue crisscrossed the quartz, like emotion fossilized in crystal. At its center, a dais of obsidian, ringed with twin halos of glowing energy, slowly rotating like two stars caught in orbit. John stopped. That's symbolic. Thalia looked at him. It's not, it's real. Those are resonance fields. If we enter together, they sync. He blinked. Sync what? She didn't answer with words. She stepped into the first halo. Light flared. Her armor glimmered faintly as strands of energy danced across her skin. The field responded instantly, vibrating as if in recognition. Her eyes fluttered closed, and her breathing deepened. Not meditation, opening. John hesitated. Okay. So, just to be clear, this isn't going to end with me turning into a goo puddle, right? Thalia opened one eye. Only metaphorically. He sighed, stepped in. The second halo swallowed him in light. It was warm, tactile. It wrapped him, not like heat or pressure, but like presence. Like something older was observing, not judging, just listening. Then the halos overlapped. A surge of force knocked John to one knee, not pain but raw emotion. He saw fragments, her memories, herself. Not scenes, but impressions. Her first breath in a world without her mother. A training ritual under triple eclipse. Laughing in a corridor with someone who never returned. The first time she saw him in the embassy garden, awkward, confused, intensely alive. At the same time, she saw him. His father's wrench-stained hands, midnight repairs in a freezing Mars station, the quiet pride of building something no one would notice, the terror of suddenly mattering. Their breaths synchronized. The field spun faster. The armor on John's back began to hum. Thalia opened her eyes. You're ready. John's voice cracked. For what? She stepped closer. Close enough to share breath, her hand pressed against his chest where the rune glowed beneath skin. The room darkened, except them, and the dice, and the two halos now becoming one. A low frequency flooded the chamber, like a heartbeat, but not biological. Planetary. The heart of Alaris was listening now. Thalia's voice was just above a whisper. Connection isn't just blood, it's choice. She leaned in, forehead to his. John didn't flinch. The armor ignited. Not with light, but with form. It spread from his spine, plates unfolding like wings made of memory. Edges curled, luminous, pulsing with violet lines. His eyes burned briefly, then steadied. He stood taller. The armor didn't cover him, it became him. Guardian Form 1, sleek, blackened chrome. Pulsing lines of energy across the joints. A curved back spine like a coiled question waiting for war. The dais lifted slightly. The halos locked, and from above the ceiling shifted. A carving revealed itself, once hidden, now burning with white fire. Two intertwined lights orbiting in harmony, not two, one. John looked down at his hands. I feel not stronger, just. Thalia smiled. Then it worked. He looked at her. What now? A rumble answered. From the world above, the Voidborn were coming again. But this time John stood straight, and the armor pulsed back. Time didn't slow. It fractured. The moment John stepped from the sanctum, wrapped in the awakened armor, the world outside ripped open. The sky over Alaris had turned to bruised glass, cracks of gold bleeding through its seams as gravity twisted in spasms. The Voidborn were descending, more now, dozens, spirals of anti-light bleeding downward like oil from a wounded sun. And below, the city screamed. Thalia's voice rang in his ear through the neural link. You don't have time to learn. Feel, let it move with you. He exhaled, and the armor breathed back. Guardian Form 1 shimmered along his spine, energy lines pulsing to the beat of his heart. Each step resonated with the ground, kinetic feedback sinking muscle to alloy, thought to metal. He launched. The air cracked as he broke it. In an instant, John was a streak of chrome and violet hurtling toward the sky, toward a void-born brute pulling a grav spike through a falling transit tower. He didn't think. He let go. His fist collided with the brute's core, and the kinetic wave behind it exploded outward, folding the creature into a jagged knot of shrieking dark. Light rippled through the impact like sonic rain. John tumbled mid-air, adjusted mid-spin, and landed on a floating platform now barely holding shape. The HUD in his vision adapted instantly. Energy 84%. What? Wait, what? What? Source. Are you kidding me? Another warning. 13's lost. Cool, so the armor's powered by me. That's totally normal. Definitely sustainable. He gritted his teeth and launched again. The next enemy was faster. A whip-limbed skirmisher darting between energy coils, slicing through Alarian defenders like air through cloth. John intercepted in a flash of violet, ducked one slash, countered with a spiraled elbow, and kicked the thing into a collapsing tower beam. Boom. More enemies swarmed. John's world became a blur of light trails, collapsing bridges, civilians fleeing under domes of flickering protection. He was flying, falling, fighting, and for the first time in his life, terrifyingly competent. He could feel the suit wanting more, pushing faster, pulling harder. Adrenaline surged. He activated a burst dash, flickered across the plaza, grabbed a void-born spear mid-throw, and redirected it into its own master's chest. Thalia's voice again, breathless. John, you're sinking with the armor beyond expectation, but pull back, you're bleeding. He looked down. She was right, not blood from wounds, but from his fingertips, from the rune lines across his arms. Entered, life threshold nearing, user degradation. His breath caught. Degradation? That's not a word you want on a Tuesday. Then he saw it. Above the city, a void-born siege beast hovered, 4 arms dragging an arc engine from the Alarian grid. It was draining the planet's shield directly. He didn't hesitate. He ascended. A trail of violet split the sky. Civilians below pointed. One child raised a hand, whispering, "The Guardian?" John slammed into the siege beast at full speed, flipping over its back and ripping a line of void armor open along its spine. His fists weren't fists anymore. Tools reshaped by thought. Plasma blades, impact coils, glowing glyphs dancing across knuckles like burning tattoos. The beast shrieked, twisted, retaliated. John dodged, barely, light cracking across his chest plate. The suit hissed. A new icon appeared in his HUD, a clock, but not ticking forward, backward, a sandglass. Inside the armor's chest it glowed, real, not virtual, an obsidian hourglass floating in a ring of light, grains of gold falling with every move, every pulse, every strike. He hovered mid-air, time froze. He could feel himself being spent. "Is this what it means to be a hero here?" he whispered. "To burn instead of bleed? Yes, not Thalia, not AI. The armor, his blood, his time, his choice." He looked down at the chaos below, then up at the void tearing the heavens. "Then let's burn smart." He flew, fast and brutal, not to kill but to draw, baiting the remaining voidborn into a pattern, circling above Alaris's central spire. Thalia picked up his plan instantly. She began channeling planetary defenses through the temple's core, and when John struck the final mark, an energy line traced between sigils, Thalia fired. The spire erupted in a web of crystal light, trapping the voidborn in a prison of harmonic resonance. They screamed, not in pain, but in dissonance, their frequencies collapsing. John landed, barely, armor steaming, body shaking. He dropped to one knee. Thalia was there, catching him before he fell fully. "You're insane," she said, eyes wide. "Thanks," John croaked. "First time someone's ever meant that as a compliment." They sat in silence for a moment. Above, the void spiral still churned. But for now, Alaris breathed again. Thalia touched his chest. Her fingers brushed the hourglass embedded there, grains still falling. "I didn't know it had that." "Neither did I," he said. "But I think it's not just measuring what I lose. It's showing me what matters." The sky didn't just split. It screamed. Voidlord descended not like a god, but like a wound in space, torn too wide. Gravity bent. The colors of Alaris bled into black. Every line of light across the temple plaza twisted, flickered, ran. The world rippled like cloth caught in a storm. John was still on one knee, the sandglass in his chest nearly dry. Then he saw her. Thalia, mid-air, intercepting the descending Void Lord. No. She struck first. Blades of pure thought, wings of energy shaped by legacy and defiance. Her armor burned like the heart of a violet star. Void Lord didn't block, he absorbed. The backlash tossed her like a comet. She slammed into the obsidian altar near the Tree of the Ancients, her body ragdolling, blood arcing in weightless streams. The vines of light running through the temple dimmed, as if her pain rippled backward into the city itself. John moved before thinking. One blink, he was beside her. Her chest rose, barely. Violet ichor bled from a wound just below her ribcage, glowing in pulses that matched the planet's failing rhythm. Her blood was a signal. The armor on John's body began to shudder. Panels hissed open across his arms and chest, not by command, but by craving. Then it drank. Thalia's blood flowed into the suit, not pooling, not staining, but being absorbed. Veins of dark violet light traced through the armor like roots through stone. John screamed. Stop! She's not a power cell. Too late, the armor shifted, humming with something deeper. The hourglass in his chest stopped for the first time. Symbiotic injection. Core evolution. Stage 2, unlocked. Too late. Link request. John froze. He looked down at Thalia. Her eyes were still closed, lips pale. But suddenly, his vision cracked. Not outward, inward. A presence brushed against his thoughts like silk. A whisper in his chest, a scent of her laughter, a memory he'd never lived. Then her voice, inside him. I'm not gone, he gasped. Thalia? She blinked. Eyes fluttered open, focused, locked on him. But not just seeing, merging. Their minds slid over each other like rivers joining at the mouth of a sea. And she smiled. Didn't think I'd let you burn alone, she said. He laughed through tears. Next time, text first. The armor morphed, not just in shape, but in intent. Black metal slid across Thalia's body as well, weaving from John's suit to hers, connecting them through the air. Not two suits. One. Symbiotic, merged, harmonized. Guardian Form 2 activated, not in a flash, but in a pulse. A living structure of mirrored armor and braided light enveloped them both. John's mask retracted. Thalia's visor opened. Their eyes locked again, but this time through the suit itself. Two faces, one pulse. The Tree of the Ancients responded. Its branches surged with violet-white light, climbing the walls, spiraling into the sky like veins in a giant's arm. The blood that had touched the roots now fed the planet itself. Void Lord turned. You awaken it, he hissed. The last convergence. The final echo. He raised one arm, formed of dark geometry and shrieking shadow, and hurled a blade of void straight toward them. John moved. No thought. No hesitation. He and Thalia launched together. Twin lines of light arcing through space, colliding with the blade in midair. Their united strike shattered the void weapon into a fractal of dying stars. They landed, synchronized, breath to breath, heartbeat to heartbeat. Then came the twist. The armor didn't just link movement, it shared memory. Images burst behind John's eyes. Thalia's childhood, alone, trained, pressured to become more than herself. Her mother's voice, soft but cold. The moment Thalia first saw John on the embassy stairs, that flicker, that curiosity, he felt it. Felt her hope, her terror, her quiet longing. And in return, she felt his, fixing broken engines in deep space, watching Earth sunsets from fuel station rooftops, never being chosen. Until now. Their minds spiraled and the suit danced with them. Violet blades emerged, coiled like helixes of DNA, spinning as extensions of will. And beneath their feet the altar cracked. Not from weight, from meaning. Runes appeared in the stone, twin spirals mirrored, double helix. Destiny carved into the planet's flesh. Thalia whispered, that's the mark of the Cedars, my ancestors. They didn't just visit Earth. They planted us, John finished, awestruck. A tremor passed through him, not fear, belonging. Above them, Void Lord howled, not in anger but recognition. Kathiktinquikum, vanuvundachant. Thalia turned to John. You're not human anymore, she said softly. He grinned, broken and bright. Then neither are you. They launched together toward the heart of darkness. The transport from the Galactic Federation did not land. It descended like a verdict. Polished angles, artificial blue thrusters, no warmth, no music, no breath. The diplomatic vessel floated above the temple ruins, humming with sterile gravity. Its hull bore the tri-sigil of Earth's unified command, 3 interlocked circles within a perfect square. It looked like logic, carved into steel. But John had never seen anything so soulless. All channel comms opening in 5. Thalia warned softly. "Let me guess," John muttered. "They're not here to send fruit baskets." From the ground, Alaris pulsed faintly beneath his boots, still reeling from the battle with Voidlord, but alive. The tree of the ancients shimmered behind them, petals of metal drifting like leaves in slow orbit. The door of the vessel hissed. Out walked Commander Alec Reeve, John's oldest friend, academy rival, former co-pilot, the kind of guy who used to hack vending machines to get free beer and quote poetry in 0G. Now he wore a Federation white-gray uniform so crisp it looked ironed by gravity itself. He stopped 5 meters from John, eyes unreadable. "Rowan Morton," he said, "you're ordered to stand down." "No, hello." "No. Are you alive?" Just the voice of a man buried in a chain of command. John raised an eyebrow. "I was hoping for nice armor or glad you survived a planetary void incursion. But sure, let's get straight to the authoritarian part. You're wearing alien tech that could destabilize galactic treaties. You've made unauthorized contact with a native sovereign. Your presence here is in violation of—" "I'm sorry, Sovereign?" John interrupted. "She has a name, Alec." A pause. Thalia stepped beside him, calm but unmistakably regal. Her violet-black armor shifted with her heartbeat, eyes glowing dimly. "Hello again, Alec," she said, her tone neutral. Alec flinched. "You remember her," John said. "From the briefings, right? The one we were told was extinct." "She's not the problem," Alec replied too quickly. "You are. Hand over the armor, now." The breath left John's lungs, slow. "It doesn't work that way," he said. Behind him, the tree's metal branches swayed in still air, almost listening. Alec stepped forward. "I'm authorized to use force." John didn't flinch. Thalia didn't move, but the ground beneath them lit up, slow, glowing rings emanating from where John stood, like a targeting system deciding what was real. And still, John said nothing. Then Alec's hand dropped. To his sidearm, Thalia's gauntlet twitched, a blur. 2 Federation guards raised rifles behind Alec. John's HUD flared red. The Guardian armor hummed, shielding up instinctively. In the reflection of his visor, John saw his own face. Not scared, not angry, just tired. "Alec," he said, "please don't." His friend's voice cracked for the first time. "You think I want to do this?" "Yes," John said, "because it's easier than asking why we were lied to." Alec's hand froze. Silence fell, thick and sharp as obsidian. John's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw it in the tree, their memories. Your Federation wiped them out, Thalia's people, not by war, by erasure. You didn't conquer Alaris, you made the galaxy forget it existed." Alec's eyes shifted. He didn't deny it. That was worse than a yes. John took a slow step forward. "We were seeded by them. The DNA, the echoes, it's in us. That armor doesn't respond to me because I'm a threat. It responds because I'm part of them. We all are." "Then why didn't it choose anyone else?" Alec asked, bitter. "Why you?" John smiled faintly. "Because I still fix broken things instead of throwing them away." The Federation seal on Alec's uniform, those perfect interlocked circles, caught the sun for a moment. But in that same moment, John saw it. A hairline fracture near the heart, a crack beneath the symbol of unity, something the designers hadn't planned, a symbol of control worn down by something human. Behind John, Thalia whispered in his thoughts, "You don't have to choose, he knew better." "I do." And so he turned, slowly away from Alec, away from Earth, toward Thalia, toward the tree, toward the armor that had already taken a part of his soul. Alec's voice trembled. "John, if you walk away, you'll be branded." John chuckled. "Finally, something about me gets branded." Then he looked back, eyes serious. "Go home, Alec. You're fighting shadows carved by bureaucrats, but I've touched the heart of a world." He paused, glanced down at the shifting sand beneath his boots. "And for the record," he added, "I still know how to break vending machines. Try me." He walked away. No gunfire followed, only silence and the distant hum of the tree, breathing. The ground split open, like a mouth gasping its final breath. John barely had time to dodge, as a lance of violet energy carved the sky in two, vaporizing a tower that had stood for 1,000 years. Stone became glass. Memory became dust. Above, the 3 moons of Alaris eclipsed each other like eyes closing in grief. "Life signs collapsing across the lower districts," Thalia said, her voice shaking through their neural link. The Guardian armor wrapped tighter around John's chest, as if it too could feel the panic. A warning blinked across his HUD. "Void integrity breach. Planetary core threatened." "What do they want?" John muttered, pulling Thalia behind a shattered column as the sky churned. They've already broken the surface. What's next? Alaris's soul. Thalia didn't answer. Her gaze wasn't on the sky, it was on the glowing scar now yawning beneath them. A spiraling sinkhole where once stood the Temple of Resonance. The heart, she whispered. They're going for the heart. A pulse rippled from the crater, like the beat of some massive, ancient creature beneath the crust. John felt it vibrate through his bones. Not just sound, not just light, but feeling, sorrow, rage, love, all wrapped in rhythm. The planet was alive, and it was hurting. Without another word, Thalia leapt, armor flaring, and dove into the abyss. John cursed and followed, a heartbeat behind. Down, down through layers of translucent stone. The walls began to change, quartz veins glowing in synchronized pulses, as if syncing with their heartbeats. Strange roots of biometal curled across the surface, carrying trickles of pure light like sap. It was beautiful, terrifying, sacred. They landed on a floating platform surrounded by what looked like nerve endings of a god. Before them floated a sphere, pulsing with every color John had no name for. At its center was a spiraling axis of light, twisting, breathing, anchored to the very essence of the planet, the heart of Alaris. And crawling over it, corrupting it, was Voidborn. Their shadows skittered like insects across the glowing surface, leaving trails of decay. The central node flickered. Every time it did, the planet trembled. John raised his arm cannon, but Thalia touched his wrist. No, she said. Weapons won't fix this. The heart responds only to resonance. To emotion? To truth, she corrected. To union. He blinked. Oh, come on. Now you're telling me the literal soul of your planet is powered by therapy? A breath. A faint laugh escaped her lips. Then she stepped forward, placed her palm against the glowing sphere. Instantly, her body convulsed. Energy coursed through her, pulling the very breath from her lungs. Thalia, but she didn't let go. The Voidborn screeched, repelled by her light, but not gone, not defeated. The heart flickered faster now, veins of light turning crimson from strain. She's channeling her life into it, the armor whispered inside John's head. Transfer rate unsustainable, collapse imminent. John sprinted to her, caught her before she fell. Her face was pale, skin crackling with excess charge, eyes half-lidded, but focused. You have to go, she whispered. You're still needed. No, John said, not this again. No noble sacrifices, no more damned last stands. You don't understand, she coughed. I am the lock, my blood, my bond. I was made for this. He held her tighter. Then we rewrite what you were made for. The Guardian armor pulsed at his back, recognizing something in his voice. Desperation, love, defiance. The core responded. John reached out, placing his hand beside hers on the heart. A blinding flash. His entire body seized, but he didn't let go. In his mind, fragments. Memories not his own. 100,000 years of songs, wars, births. Alien hands building stars. Human hands touching for the first time. The first Earth cry. The last Alaris lullaby. Then, clarity. You cannot hold it alone, the voice said. I'm not alone, John answered. And with that, he made a choice. He gave, not his armor, not his weapons, but time. Years of his life. Memories. Things he'd never get to do. The taste of oranges, the laugh of rain, the warmth of a late sunrise. He gave it willingly. Thalia gasped as the overload faded. She blinked. Alive. He collapsed, but smiled. Above them, the heart flared gold-white, no longer pulsing in distress but in harmony. The Voidborn screeched and dissolved like shadows fleeing dawn. From the glowing roots, a tree began to grow, light and metal entwined, rising from the core itself, its branches spreading into the dark. The Tree of Echoes. A symbol not just of Alaris's rebirth, but of two beings choosing to become instead of destroy. Thalia crawled to John's side. His skin was dimmer now, eyes tired, a few gray strands shimmered at his temple. You gave it to me, she whispered, borrowed tide, voice soft. You'll pay me back, maybe with tea? She laughed, kissed his forehead. The heart pulsed once, then steadied. Outside, the planet held its breath, then exhaled. There is a kind of silence that only comes before gods die. Above the heart of Alaris, the sky cracked. Not lightning, not storm, rupture. Like space itself had been torn open by grief. Through it stepped a shape not quite human, drifting, slow, inevitable. Cloaked in shadow armor, layered in frayed timelines and memories unspoken, the Void Lord descended. Its face was hidden behind a helm of obsidian glass, but beneath it, two familiar eyes pulsed with pale blue glow. John's eyes. John, Thalia whispered, as if speaking too loud would break the last thread of reality. "It's me," John said, "or what I could become." The guardian armor on his body flickered, responding to a signal it hadn't yet processed but somehow knew. A resonance. "You failed," the Void Lord said, voice 1,000 echoes. "Some human, some not. You loved, you gave, you thought that was enough." Behind it, stars bled backward. Nebulas bent like breath in cold glass. John stood tall, eyes locked onto his own corrupted reflection. "And yet, you're still here." "I survived love," the Void Lord replied, "but I lost self." The guardian armor trembled, then ignited. John's scream wasn't one of pain, it was recognition. Not fear of the enemy before him, but of the fire awakening within. Thalia tried to run to him. "Don't," he said. "This part is mine alone." The armor unfolded like wings of burning steel. Black plates turned translucent, then golden white, as energy from the Tree of Echoes surged upward. The final protocol activated. Guardian Form 3, Resonant Singularity. John hovered above the ground, not held by thrusters, by will. His body no longer moved. It flowed, like wind across fire, like thought through time. Around him, gravity bent, rocks hovered, light curved inward. He had become the storm he once feared. But inside his mind, only one emotion remained. Not rage, not fear, not grief, love. All other feelings had burned away to forge this last form. He lifted his hand. The air around his palm shimmered with possibilities. Across from him, the Void Lord raised a mirrored hand. Two timelines collided. "You always thought your feelings made you strong," the Void Lord said. "No," John whispered, "they made me real." The clash came not with sound, but with silence, so deep it swallowed suns. The Guardian Form 3 accelerated beyond perception, slamming into the Void Lord like a nova. Time fractured. For a moment, past and future danced side by side. A child John, laughing in Earth gravity. The first time he saw Thalia's face in starlight. The moment he touched the armor. The future he refused to become. Inside the storm, he saw it all. The Void Lord tried to crush him with memories he'd buried. Regrets, failures, every face he couldn't save. John answered not with denial, but with acceptance. "I am not your shadow," he said. He opened his chest plate. A light burst out, not energy, but emotion, compressed into one eternal pulse. The heart of Alaris sang back in harmony. The Void Lord hesitated. Too late. John surged forward. The guardian armor disassembled mid-strike, melting into waves of pure intent. No weapon, no punch, just light. He struck the Void Lord's chest and whispered, "Let go." The obsidian helm shattered. And beneath it, John's face, older, cracked, tears in the corners of its ghost blue eyes. "I couldn't save her," the Void Lord whispered. "Not even you can." John leaned in. "I already did." The light engulfed them both. In the vacuum that followed, only one form remained, falling from the sky like a broken star. Thalia caught him before he hit the ground. He was alive, but not the same. Hair now silvered, skin faintly glowing from within. The final burn had passed through him, leaving behind only what mattered. What happened?" she whispered, brushing his cheek. John opened his eyes. They were right. That armor burns everything but one thing. "What's that?" he smiled. "You." Above them the sky healed, the rupture sealed, and on the Tree of Echoes, two lights pulsed in harmony, one gold, one violet, wrapped around each other like twin hearts. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, so full it hummed. Alaris had gone still. The sky no longer bled. The Tree of Echoes had stopped glowing. Thalia stood at the edge of the ruined platform, her breath misting in the sudden cold. John knelt before her, still panting, armor cracked, eyes unfocused, like someone who had looked too far into their own future and returned half whole. Behind them, the remnants of the Void Lord dissolved into threads of light, each one a memory, vanishing into the void. "They're gone?" Thalia asked. John didn't respond immediately. He placed a hand on the ground. Nothing happened. He exhaled long and low. "Not gone," he murmured. "Changed." Above, the sky shivered. Threads of dark matter began writhing again, the leftover portals of the Voidborn beginning to reopen, angry at the absence of their master. They didn't care who wore the face of the Void Lord, they only fed. Thalia turned to John. "They're not stopping." He stood slowly. They weren't meant to. Then he looked to the Tree of Echoes. Its branches trembled, energy fluttering like a dying heart. "They weren't the end," he said, "just the echo of something older." The portals expanded, their mouths wide, hungering, and John understood. He raised a single hand. From the tree, a thread of golden energy extended, coiling toward his palm like a whisper. "I can't fight them," he said. "Not anymore." Thalia stepped forward. "Then what will you do?" He turned, face softer than she'd ever seen it. "I'll give them something they've never known." Then he pressed his hand to the tree, and everything shattered. A burst of light erupted, not explosive, but resonant, like every memory, every feeling, every unspoken word compressed into a single heartbeat. The sky cracked open again, this time not with void, but with emotion. From John's chest, golden threads unfurled, wrapping the portals, each thread carrying something different. The first time he felt gravity. The first time someone held his hand. The ache when he left Earth. The moment Thalia said his name like it mattered. He poured it all in. One by one, the portals quivered. Not in fear, but recognition. The resonance wasn't destruction. It was invitation. It was saying, "I see you, and I forgive you." And like glass under sunlight, the dark matter began to crack. Each fracture emitted a note of music, haunting, strange, beautiful. Thalia watched as John became the center of a storm made entirely of memory. She wanted to scream, to run to him. But she understood. This wasn't a war. It was a release. One by one, the Voidborn collapsed, not in fire or blood, but in light, vanishing like regrets finally let go. As the final portal folded into itself, a single feather drifted down. White, slightly glowing, faintly metallic, a feather of light. It landed in Thalia's palm, warm to the touch. A silver feather, soft as breath. She turned toward John, and found him collapsed, his armor gone, his skin faintly glowing with residual resonance. She knelt beside him, lifting his head onto her lap. He blinked slowly, as if returning from centuries. "Did it work?" he asked, voice hoarse. She smiled through the wet in her eyes. "You did it, Rowan." "I didn't fight them," he said. "I just let them feel." "Sometimes," she whispered, brushing hair from his face, "that's the bravest thing." Above, the tree of echoes bloomed anew. Its leaves were now feathers, soft, glistening silver in the moonlight. And for the first time in Alaris's long memory, there was peace. The wind in Alaris had changed. It no longer howled like it mourned the stars. It hummed, gently, like a lullaby through leaves that were not yet born. Thalia stood in the garden of the ancients. Except it was no longer a garden. The devastation from the resonance collapse had shattered its crystalline arches, melted stone, and turned the roots of the tree of echoes into glass veins. But in the center, where John had once touched the heart of the planet, something new had emerged. A stem, thin, fragile, glistening like it was carved from pure dawnlight. A sapling of light. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. John stirred beside her. No armor, no glowing threads, just skin, sweat, bruises, breath. But he was alive, barely. Thalia knelt her hand on the soil. No, on the energy pulsing through it. The ground was warm, but not just physically. It felt aware. "John?" she whispered. He opened his eyes slowly. Not the silver glow of the Guardian, not the fire of a fighter, just human, plain, quiet, alive. "Did we win?" he asked. Thalia smiled, then winced as a faint surge of energy spiraled up her arm. She clutched her side. John noticed immediately. "You okay?" "I think so." But her expression said otherwise. She looked down. A faint orb of light had appeared above her palm, dancing like a dandelion seed in slow motion. John blinked. It pulsed. Once, twice, 2 heartbeats. She stared at it. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "It just appeared." John sat up slowly. "That's not just energy." "No." She closed her hand gently around it. "It's life." A long silence passed between them. The sky above was beginning to shift. No longer a bruised violet, but tinged with gentle gold. The twin moons rotated into view, casting twin shadows across the ruins of the ancient's temple. Something was different in Thalia's face. Not fear. Not power. Something older, more sacred. "Rowan," she said softly, "I think I'm carrying a part of you." His heart stopped, then beat again, slower, stronger. She touched her stomach, barely noticeable under the folds of her armor-shard-wrapped robes. John blinked. "Wait, you mean like..." "I don't know," she cut in, smiling awkwardly. "I'm not sure what this means in your language. But our energies, they fused. You sure it wasn't just, weird afterglow from nearly dying and exploding the void?" Thalia gave him a look. "Right," he coughed, "sorry. Human joke." Her hand hovered again, and the orb appeared once more, spinning, glowing, warm. John reached out. It floated to his fingers. The moment he touched it, a soft thump-thump echoed in his chest. Matched, mirrored, twinned. His eyes met hers, a beat past another. And both laughed, quietly, breathlessly, like two survivors who knew the universe would never be simple again, and didn't mind. From the ruins behind them, the sapling of light shimmered higher. A second leaf sprouted, twisting toward them like it sensed who they were. The soil pulsed again. Not a grave anymore, but a womb. "I guess this is what rebirth feels like," John murmured. Thalia nodded. "It doesn't roar like battle, it breathes like hope." They stood together in the soft glow. Above them, a single bird, feathers of translucent gold, circled overhead. And below, in the roots of the ancients, the planet of Alaris began its new rhythm. Not war, not mourning, but preparation for something new, or someone new. And in the air around them, the energy orb pulsed again, once, twice, a twin heartbeat. The ancient temple no longer echoed with chants of mourning. Now it hummed with voices, dozens, hundreds of different timbres, languages, and heartbeats. Human, Alarian, other. The walls, once cracked from war and sorrow, were now stitched with living crystal, glowing faintly in soft pulses like a new circulatory system for something reborn. John stood beneath the archway of the Temple of Echoes, wearing the kind of uniform that didn't fit quite right, half diplomat, half survivor, half still not sure how the hell I got here. The sash around his chest bore no rank, only the new sigil, a spiral of light encircling a single tree, rooted in stars. Behind him, the old armor stood in silence. Mounted against the obsidian wall, the black exoshell glistened under lantern light, deactivated, sealed, watching. Its chest plate still bore the faint indent of Thalia's touch. Its core, long since dormant, had not pulsed in weeks, yet it hummed when no one looked. Thalia stepped up beside him, now draped in flowing robes that shimmered with runes of diplomatic status. Still regal, still dangerous, but softer, like the sharp edges of a blade placed back into a sheath. "They think it's over," she said, her voice low. "Isn't it?" John glanced at the room beyond, where a group of Earth kids tried levitating glowing orbs under Alarian mentorship, and failed spectacularly, one bursting into glitter on a diplomat's head. Thalia smirked. "Mostly, for now." John adjusted his collar. "Peace feels weird. You'll get used to it. I'll try. But you know what really throws me off?" He nodded toward a group of Earth and Alarian chefs arguing over the ethics of mixing seaweed and ionized crystal fruit. "Fusion cuisine," Thalia laughed. For a moment, just a woman. No prophecy, no fire, no world saving. Just her. But her smile dimmed as she looked toward the back of the temple. To the cracked pillar. It had been repaired. Mostly. Polished, resealed. But one thin fracture line remained, barely visible, running like a vein of shadow through the marble. John followed her gaze. "We could have covered it," he said. "No," she said. "Let it show." He nodded. "Wounds shouldn't always be hidden." They both turned as an aide approached, young, stiff-backed, earthborn, eyes too clean. He handed John a sealed data prism, then nodded and left without a word. John tapped the surface, a light projected. "Federation Science Directive, Sector 12, Authorization, Level Prime." Thalia frowned. "That's restricted." John frowned deeper. "That's my level." The data flickered. Inside, an image appeared. The armor, but not this one. A fragment. Same material, same architecture, but twisted, cracked, stored in a human lab. Coordinates, deep in Federation territory. "Someone retrieved a piece of the old tech during the collapse," John muttered. "Against protocol." Thalia's breath slowed. "They want to replicate it. Or weaponize it." The room around them suddenly felt colder. John looked up at the mounted armor. Its reflection shimmered almost like it knew. He clenched the prism in his fist. Thalia stepped forward, touching his hand. "This piece is real, but it's fragile." John nodded. "Like a glass bridge. Or a heartbeat between silences." He smiled. "Poetic. You're rubbing off on me." He looked back at the children laughing in the next hall. The sapling of light, replanted beside the altar, as was now 3 feet tall, 2 leaves, still glowing. The armor behind them made no sound, but beneath its surface the ancient runes pulsed once. Faint, quiet, but alive. And in the crack on the pillar a thin trail of dust had begun to stir, drawn ever so slightly inward. John stared a little longer, then turned to Thalia. "We're not done." She squeezed his hand. "We never were." The new world had no name. Not yet. To the humans, it was Sector Or 9. To the Alarians, it was simply Solerha, where light takes root. But to John, it was something simpler. Home. The The twin suns hovered low on the horizon, casting long shadows of crystal forests across the silver soil. Wind moved in waves, not gusts, like a breath held by the planet itself. The sky was deep violet, speckled with stars even during daylight. In the distance, the Heart Spire pulsed faintly, remnant tech of the ancient core, now transformed into a beacon. And within the dome of bioglass that shielded the central sanctuary, something stirred. A heartbeat. Then two. Thalia lay resting on a silken surface, her hair cascading like silver liquid over her shoulders. Her breath was calm, steady, still glowing faintly from the energy transference months ago. Beside her, John sat, one hand on hers, the other trembling. Then the infant cried. Not a human cry, not a Larian either, something in between. The child blinked, eyes adjusting instantly to light, pupils like shifting galaxies. Its skin was the pale glow of early dawn, and across its back from shoulder to shoulder shimmered a pattern, not a scar, not a birthmark, a rune, carved by no hand, glowing with faint purple-red hues. The same pattern John had once seen crawl across the ancient armor. The same symbol etched in stone in the Temple of Echoes. The double helix within the eye of a storm. John couldn't breathe for a second, not from fear. An awe. He looked at Thalia. She was already crying silently. She whispered, "He carries both, not half, whole." Outside, the wind stilled, and above the dome, a small orb of energy shimmered into view, a memory crystal, one of the last from the Ilarian core. It floated downward, drawn to the infant like metal to magnet. The baby reached up, tiny fingers closing around the light. And the moment the skin touched crystal, it pulsed, a sharp flicker, a sound like distant bells. Then the orb bloomed into radiant light, engulfing the room in colorless brilliance. Time seemed to slow. Through the haze, runes appeared, above the child, floating, rotating. And then, as if the universe leaned in to listen, a final phrase etched itself into the air. "We do not die, we transform." Then silence, only a soft thump, thump, the ambient heart of the world beneath them. John reached out and cradled the baby in his arms. The child looked up, not confused, not crying, but aware. Something ancient shimmered behind its eyes, something impossibly new. John let out a shaky breath. "Kid," he muttered, "you've got your mother's eyes and your dad's luck, which means we're probably all screwed." Thalia laughed softly, exhausted. The light receded. The crystal fell dormant. And the rune on the child's back faded to a soft warmth, like a secret waiting to awaken again. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the spire, an old machine clicked once, just once, and went silent. The pulse of the world resumed, and in the sky above them, a new constellation appeared. 12 points of light arranged like a spiral, the same pattern etched into the old armor's core. It had never been a weapon. It had always been a seed. In a universe where legacy, love, and sacrifice shape destiny, Echo of the Ancients reminds us, we don't die, we transform. Subscribe to Sci-Fi Sky for more cinematic sci-fi tales full of heart, action, and wonder. If you felt something, there's more waiting for you here.